The last thing I expected when I woke up this morning was to become royalty. Then again, I hadn't expected to be hungry either. But life has a way of surprising you on both counts. My name is Raiden Quill, former exploration pilot, current fugitive from interplanetary justice, perpetual disappointment to authority figures everywhere, and, as of approximately 6 hours ago, apparent husband to the most powerful woman in the known universe. All because I wanted a damn sandwich. The leather jacket I'm wearing has seen better days. Actually, it's seen better decades. The collar is frayed. The right elbow has been patched 3 times. And the original color, once a rich brown, has faded to the approximate shade of dried mud. It smells faintly of engine oil, cosmic dust, and regret. I love it more than most people. This jacket and I have been through a lot together. We've survived emergency landings on hostile planets, bar fights with tentacled gangsters, and that one time we accidentally insulted a hive mind by wearing non-complementary colors. But today might be the jacket's final journey, because I'm pretty sure we're both about to be incinerated for treason against the galactic throne. It all started, as most problems in my life do, with hunger. Hunger is a funny thing in space. The Alliance of United Planets has technically solved hunger with their nutrient capsules. Little green pills that provide everything a body needs to survive. But surviving isn't living. And those capsules taste like what I imagine licking the underside of a transport ship would taste like. So when I docked at Cerix Delta, a sprawling market planet at the edge of the regulated zones, my first thought wasn't about restocking fuel cells or updating my navigation systems. It was about finding something, anything, that didn't taste like recycled proteins and synthetic vitamins. Cerix Delta's main bazaar is a sensory overload of the highest order. Imagine taking every spice market, tech fair, and exotic pet shop in the universe, cramming them into one massive dome, then adding enough neon lighting to give a supernova an inferiority complex. Vendors hawk their wares in dozens of languages, and the air is thick with the mingled scents of alien cuisines that range from mouth-watering to mildly toxic. For someone like me, someone with my reputation, navigating this chaos is second nature. I kept my head down, my collar up, and my walk casual. The Interplanetary Exploration Corps doesn't send out formal wanted notices for disgraced pilots like me. But there's an unofficial blacklist, and my name features prominently, Raiden Quill. The disciplinary report had read, removed from active duty due to moral improvisation outside approved parameters. What that really meant was, I chose to save a nameless species from extinction instead of mapping a potentially profitable asteroid belt. The species in question looked like a cross between an Earth jellyfish and a violin, with translucent bodies that produced haunting melodies when they moved. They weren't on any conservation lists. They hadn't been cataloged. According to the Corps' ethical algorithms, they weren't worth the fuel it would take to evacuate them before the mining operation began. I disagreed, violently, and expensively. The indigenous jellyfish violins now thrive on a protected moon. I now thrive, using the term loosely, on whatever odd jobs come my way for pilots willing to bypass a few regulations. It's not a great living, but I sleep better. Or I would, if I weren't so hungry. I followed my nose through the market, past stalls selling glowing fruits from the greenhouse moons of Vega, past vendors offering fresh-caught something or others from the methane seas of Titan X. Nothing seemed quite right until I caught a whiff of something familiar. Onions. Not just any onions. Grilled onions. The kind that get sweet and caramelized and make your mouth water even before you see them. It was the smell of comfort food, of home, of Earth cuisine that had somehow made its way to this distant corner of the galaxy. I tracked the scent to a small stall, tucked between a dealer in counterfeit identity chips and a merchant selling what appeared to be either exotic plants or very strange hairpieces. Behind a sizzling grill stood a green-skinned being with 4 arms, expertly flipping what looked remarkably like hot dogs. "What are those?" I asked, pointing to the tubes of meat browning on the grill. The vendor's three eyes blinked in sequence. Earth-style protein cylinders in fermented grain casings. Very authentic. Made from genuine synthesized beef, analog. My stomach growled. "I'll take one, with the grilled onions." The vendor named a price that would have bought me a week's worth of nutrient capsules. I grimaced but reached for my credit chip. Some things are worth the splurge. "No credit," the vendor said, all three eyes narrowing. "Physical currency only." Of course. The one time I'm willing to spend ridiculous money on food. And they won't take digital payment. This is the universe reminding me of my place in it. "Sorry," I said, stepping back. "Maybe next time." I turned away, the smell of grilled onions following me like a taunting ghost. My stomach voiced its displeasure loudly enough that a passing Mornaxian, a species known for their exceptional hearing, shot me a sympathetic look with one of their ear eyes. That's when I spotted it. Through a gap in the market stalls, past a curtained archway that appeared to lead to some kind of restricted area, I saw a table laden with food, real food, and right there in the center, like a beacon of hope and deliciousness, was what could only be described as the perfect hot dog, nestled in a fresh bun and topped with grilled onions. Now, I should clarify something. I'm not a thief. Not usually. I've bent plenty of rules in my time, but outright stealing isn't my style. However, there's a hierarchy of needs. And when you've been eating nutrient capsules for 3 months straight, food ethics become surprisingly flexible. I glanced around. The curtained archway was unguarded, though a small, ornate sign in universal script warned that this was a sanctified zone, and unauthorized entities will be purified. Standard religious mumbo-jumbo. Every other planet has some sacred spot or another, and the penalties for trespassing usually amount to a fine or a stern lecture about respecting local customs. What's the worst that could happen? They make me pay for the hot dog? With the practiced nonchalance of someone who's spent years avoiding attention. I slipped through the curtain and into the restricted area. Inside was quieter, the raucous noise of the market muffled by thick, ceremonial draperies. The space was circular, with the food-laden table at its center and various ornate objects, probably religious artifacts, arranged on pedestals around the perimeter. I moved directly toward my target. The hot dog, or whatever this culture's equivalent was, looked even better up close. The bun was golden, the sausage perfectly browned, and the grilled onions glistened invitingly. Next to it sat other foods, all arranged with meticulous care, but I only had eyes for my prize. I reached out, fingers mere centimeters from the bun. "Halt! Sacrilege!" The shout came from behind me, accompanied by the unmistakable sound of energy weapons powering up. I froze, hand still extended, then slowly raised both arms in surrender. "Turn around, defiler," commanded a stern voice. I complied, finding myself facing a semicircle of what were clearly temple guards, tall, imposing figures in iridescent armor that shifted colors like oil on water. Their helmets concealed their faces, but their postures communicated everything I needed to know about how much trouble I was in. "This is a misunderstanding," I said, employing my most charming smile. "I got lost looking for the restroom." "You have violated the sacred chamber of celestial union," intoned the central guard. "You have touched the royal spirit offering. By ancient law, you are now bound in matrimony to her luminous majesty, Empress Galaxia, sovereign of the seven systems, light of the eternal cosmos, and supreme ruler of all known space." I blinked. What now?" "Seize the destined consort," the guard ordered. And that's how, less than an hour later, I found myself in a holding cell aboard what I would soon learn was the imperial flagship of the galactic throne. My leather jacket had been confiscated for purification. My identity scanned and logged in systems far above my usual criminal pay grade. And my future had taken a turn so bizarre that even my notably creative imagination was struggling to process it. A marriage to an Empress because of a hot dog. The holding cell was nicer than most I'd been in, and I've sampled quite a few across the galaxy. Instead of the standard issue force field or titanium bars, this one had actual walls of some pearlescent material that seemed to glow from within. The bench I sat on was padded, and the air smelled faintly of something floral rather than the usual disinfectant and despair. I was contemplating whether these improved accommodations made up for the whole forced matrimony to an unknown galactic dictator situation when the door slid open. In walked the most intimidating woman I had ever seen. She wasn't physically imposing. In fact, she was rather petite, standing perhaps half a head shorter than me, but she carried herself with such absolute authority that the room seemed to shrink around her. Her skin was pale blue, almost luminescent, with faint patterns that reminded me of star charts swirling just beneath the surface. Her eyes were completely black, like looking into deep space itself, but with pinpoints of light that might have been stars or might have been reflections of the room's illumination. Her attire was both regal and practical, a form-fitting suit of some material I couldn't identify, with a high collar and subtle geometric patterns that shifted as she moved. No flowing robes or impractical crown, just the unmistakable aura of someone who commanded solar systems with a word. "So," she said, her voice cool and precise, "you're the one who's caused all this commotion." I stood, partly out of instinct and partly because sitting made me feel even more at a disadvantage. If by commotion you mean being kidnapped and informed I'm somehow married to the ruler of the galaxy because I was hungry, then yes, guilty as charged. A slight narrowing of those starfield eyes. You admit to entering the sacred chamber and touching the spirit offering. I admit to trying to get a hot dog from what I thought was just another food stall. I crossed my arms. No one mentioned anything about mystical marriage ceremonies or galactic empresses. It was clearly marked as a sanctified zone. Yeah, but every tourist trap in the galaxy has sacred this and blessed that. Usually it just means they want to charge you extra. The Empress, Galaxia, if that was really her name and not some elaborate title, studied me with those disconcerting eyes. "You're human," she said finally. "From Earth. Born and raised. Well, born there. Anyway, haven't been back in a while." "And you were a pilot for the Interplanetary Exploration Corps?" Not a question, but I answered anyway. "Former pilot. We had a difference of opinion about the value of non-cataloged species." Something flickered across her face. So quickly I almost missed it. Interest? Surprise? "The jellyfish violins of Proxima Centauri 4. I couldn't hide my shock. "You know about that." "I make it my business to know about acts of moral improvisation that conflict with established ethical algorithms." She took a step closer, and I resisted the urge to step back. "Tell me, Raiden Quill, if you knew the consequences, would you make the same choice again? To save the jellyfish violins in a heartbeat." I met her gaze steadily. "Some things are worth the cost." Another flicker. Then she abruptly changed the subject. "Do you understand the situation you're in?" "Honestly, not even slightly." "By touching the spirit offering during the celestial alignment, you have fulfilled an ancient prophecy, or, more accurately, triggered an ancient legal clause in our constitutional monarchy. You are now, in the eyes of our law and religion, my destined consort." I let out a short laugh. "That's ridiculous. You can't just be married to someone because they touched a sandwich." "It wasn't a sandwich. It was a ceremonial offering representing the union of disparate elements into harmonious wholeness. It was a hot dog with grilled onions. Her mouth tightened slightly. The form of the offering varies according to cosmic alignments. This cycle, it manifested as your earth food. Convenient. I ran a hand through my hair, a nervous habit I've never managed to break. Look, Your Majesty, luminousness, whatever. There has to be a way out of this. An annulment. A do-over. Something. There are two ways out, she said coldly. You can complete the union through the royal consummation ceremony, or you can be executed for desecrating a holy relic. Those are the options our laws provide. I stared at her. Those are terrible options. Nevertheless, they are the only ones available. She turned to leave, then paused. The Royal Council will convene in 12 standard hours to determine your fate. I suggest you use that time to consider your position carefully. Wait, I called, as she reached the door. Can I at least get my jacket back? She looked over her shoulder, and for just a moment, I thought I saw the corner of her mouth twitch upward. We'll see. The door slid shut behind her, leaving me alone with the realization that I was in far deeper trouble than I'd initially thought. This wasn't just some local customs violation that could be smoothed over with credits and apologies. This was high-level political and religious entanglement with a woman who apparently ruled most of known space. All because I wanted a hot dog with grilled onions. I collapsed back onto the bench and stared at the glowing ceiling. Well, Raiden, I muttered to myself. At least you're not hungry anymore. My stomach chose that moment to growl audibly, proving that the universe's sense of humor remained intact, even if my freedom did not. The next 12 hours passed with excruciating slowness. No one came to question me further, though unseen mechanisms provided water and, ironically, nutrient capsules when I voiced my hunger. My jacket wasn't returned, leaving me feeling oddly vulnerable in just my standard-issue flight pants and worn thermal shirt. I tried to sleep, but managed only fitful dozing. My mind kept circling back to the impossible situation I found myself in. Marriage to an empress? Execution for hot dog theft? It was absurd enough that I might have laughed if the consequences weren't so dire. What bothered me most, though, wasn't the threat of death or forced marriage. It was the profound unfairness of it all. A system of laws and customs so rigid that it would either kill a man or force him into marriage over such a trivial misunderstanding seemed fundamentally broken. It reminded me too much of the Corps' ethical algorithms, coldly calculating the value of lives based on predefined parameters without any room for compassion or common sense. When the guards finally came for me, I had worked myself into a righteous indignation that probably wasn't going to help my case, but felt better than fear. There were 6 of them, all in the same color-shifting armor I'd seen before. They didn't speak, simply gestured for me to follow, which I did with as much dignity as I could muster. We traveled through corridors of the same pearlescent material as my cell, occasionally passing other beings who would stop and stare as I walked by. Most were humanoid, though with the same blue-tinted skin as the Empress, but I also spotted several species I'd never encountered before. Finally, we arrived at a massive doorway that slid open to reveal what could only be described as a throne room. The ceiling soared at least 30 meters high, with a transparent dome that revealed the star-streaked view of hyperspace travel. The floor was inlaid with what looked like actual precious metals and gemstones, forming intricate patterns that seemed to flow and change as I watched. And at the far end, elevated on a dais of floating platforms, sat Empress Galaxia on a throne that appeared to be carved from a single massive crystal. Around her, arranged on lower platforms, sat what I assumed was the Royal Council, a dozen beings of various species, all draped in formal attire that marked them as officials of high rank. I was led to the center of the room and left standing alone, conspicuously underdressed and increasingly aware of how many important people were staring at me. Raiden Quill of Earth, announced a tall, thin being with skin like burnished copper. You stand before the Royal Council of the Seven Systems, accused of sacred trespass and activation of the Celestial Union Compact. How do you plead? Confused, I replied honestly, and hungry, but mostly confused. A ripple of what might have been laughter, quickly suppressed, ran through some of the council members. The copper-skinned announcer looked less amused. This is not a time for Earth humor, he said sternly. The charges against you are serious. So is my confusion, I countered. I accidentally took food from what I didn't know was a sacred place. In my culture, that's called a misunderstanding, not a crime warranting execution or forced marriage. Your cultural norms are irrelevant here, said a counselor to the right of the throne, a being with 4 arms and elaborately braided silver hair. The laws of the Seven Systems are clear. Then the laws are clearly ridiculous, I said, earning gasps from several council members. No reasonable system punishes honest mistakes with death. Silence, thundered the copper-skinned announcer. You will show respect to the council and to her luminous majesty. I looked directly at Galaxia, who had remained silent throughout the exchange. With all due respect, Your Majesty, this whole situation is absurd. You can't possibly want to marry a random human who accidentally touched your ceremonial hot dog. What I want is irrelevant, she replied, her voice carrying effortlessly across the chamber. The laws that bind the Seven Systems have maintained peace for millennia. They cannot be set aside for convenience. Even when they're forcing you into marriage with a stranger? I asked incredulously. A new voice entered the conversation, deep, resonant, and somehow ancient. The Celestial Union is not a mere marriage, human. It is a cosmic alignment, a joining of fates written in the stars themselves. I turned to see who had spoken. To the left of the throne sat what appeared to be an elderly member of Galaxia's species. His blue skin faded almost to white with age, his eyes milky with cataracts, yet somehow still piercing. Grand Hierophant, I acknowledged, guessing at his title based on his ornate robes and prominent position. With respect, where I come from, we generally get to know someone before deciding our fates are cosmically aligned. Where you come from, the Hierophant replied, is a primitive world barely beginning to understand the complexities of interstellar civilization. Primitive enough to believe in free choice and personal autonomy. I shot back. Novel concepts. I know. The council erupted in outraged murmurs. The Empress raised a hand, and silence fell instantly. Raiden Quill, she said, while your manner is disrespectful, your argument is not without merit. The council will consider alternatives to the traditional resolution of this situation. The Grand Hierophant looked alarmed. Your Majesty, the law is absolute. The law, Galaxia interrupted, is a tool to serve the people of the Seven Systems, not a master to enslave us. She turned her star-filled eyes back to me. However, any alternative must maintain the stability of the realm. The Celestial Union was prophesied to bring peace at a time of great turmoil, and we are indeed facing such a time. What kind of turmoil? I asked, suddenly curious despite myself. A counselor with features like carved obsidian answered, We have recently concluded a devastating war with the Outer Rim Coalition. The peace is fragile, maintained in part by the promise of this very union, which was foretold to bind disparate worlds together. So I'm a political pawn, I said flatly. A linchpin, corrected Galaxia, though not one we expected to be quite so human. Or quite so irreverent, added the copper-skinned announcer with obvious disapproval. I was about to respond when the massive doors behind me burst open. A guard rushed in, moving with the urgent purpose of someone delivering very bad news. "Your Majesty," the guard called, dropping to one knee. "A communication from the Outer Rim Coalition. They demand an audience immediately." Galaxia's expression hardened. "Put them through." A holographic projection appeared in the center of the room, just meters from where I stood. It showed a being that resembled nothing so much as a sentient thundercloud, a swirling mass of dark vapor, with occasional flashes of energy, that might have been its version of facial expressions. "Empress," the cloud boomed, its voice like distant thunder. "We have received intelligence that the prophesied Celestial Union has been activated." "Your intelligence is correct, Ambassador Vox," Galaxia replied coolly. "Then we also understand that you intend to circumvent this sacred bond." The cloud darkened ominously. "Such an action would be viewed as a direct violation of our peace accords." I couldn't help myself. "Excuse me, Mr. Cloud. You're saying that if she doesn't marry me, a complete stranger she just met, you'll go back to war?" The thundercloud swiveled what I assumed was its attention toward me. "You are the destined one? I'm the guy who was really hungry and made a cultural faux pas. But apparently, that makes me the destined one, yes." Lightning crackled through the cloud's form. "Your flippancy does not change cosmic truth. The prophesied union must proceed, or the coalition will consider all agreements null and void." "Ambassador," Galaxia interjected, "surely the spirit of the prophecy can be honored without adhering to its literal interpretation. The coalition does not recognize spirit over letter. Empress, you have until the next alignment, 3 standard days, to complete the union, or we will respond accordingly." The hologram flickered out without ceremony. A heavy silence fell over the throne room. I looked at Galaxia, who for the first time appeared troubled, her composure slightly fractured. "Well," I said into the silence, "that complicates things." "Indeed," she replied, and I could have sworn I detected a note of dry humor beneath the concern. "The council will adjourn to discuss our options. In the meantime," she paused, then added, "return Raidenquill's jacket and provide him with suitable accommodations. If he is to be the Imperial consort, even temporarily, he cannot be treated as a prisoner." I blinked in surprise. "Thank you, Your Majesty." She rose from her throne, the movement fluid and graceful. "And for Star's sake, get the man some proper food, preferably something without ceremonial significance." As I was led away, I caught her watching me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't warmth, exactly, but it wasn't the cold authority she'd shown before. It was something more complex. Calculation, perhaps, or curiosity, whatever it was. I had the distinct feeling that Empress Galaxia found me just as puzzling as I found this entire situation. My suitable accommodations turned out to be a suite larger than any apartment I'd ever lived in. The main room featured a panoramic window that looked out on the streaming lights of hyperspace, comfortable furnishings in subdued colors, and atmospheric controls that actually worked properly. A luxury I hadn't experienced in years of budget transport ships and questionable lodgings. True to the Empress's word, my leather jacket was returned, freshly cleaned but thankfully still retaining its character. And the food that arrived shortly after was not only proper, but extraordinary. A spread of dishes from across the galaxy, including, I noted with amusement, a plate of hot dogs with grilled onions. I had just finished my second helping when the door chimed. Before I could respond, it slid open to admit a delegation of what appeared to be royal attendants, 4 beings of various species, all dressed in the same muted gray uniforms with subtle insignias I didn't recognize. "Greetings, destined consort," said the foremost attendant, a tall being with features that reminded me of a terrestrial fox. "We have been assigned to prepare you for your new role." "I don't have a new role," I said, wiping my mouth with a napkin that was probably worth more than my ship. "This is all a misunderstanding that we're trying to resolve," the fox being tilted its head. "Nevertheless, until resolution is achieved, protocols must be observed. The Royal Council has instructed us to begin your cultural integration and ceremonial preparation." Cultural integration? Indeed. You must learn the customs, history, and protocols of the seven systems. You must be instructed in court etiquette and imperial traditions. You must be measured for appropriate attire and assessed for suitable modifications. I nearly choked on my last bite. Modifications, as in body modifications. "Nothing invasive for the preliminary ceremonies," assured another attendant, this one resembling a humanoid with iridescent scales. "Merely cosmetic enhancements to better represent your new status." "No modifications," I said firmly. "No enhancements. And I'm keeping my jacket." The attendants exchanged glances. "The leather outer garment does not meet imperial standards of dignity," said the fox being. "The leather outer garment stays," I insisted. "Consider it an Earth cultural artifact of great significance." More glances were exchanged, but they seemed to accept this compromise. What followed was several hours of what could only be described as royal boot camp. I was lectured on the history of the seven systems, drilled on the proper forms of address for various dignitaries, and shown holographic demonstrations of court ceremonies so complex they made interstellar navigation look straightforward. Throughout it all, I maintained a facade of reluctant cooperation while mentally cataloging everything I learned. If there was a way out of this situation, a loophole in their rigid systems, I would find it, and if not, well, I'd survived worse scrapes. Probably. The most interesting information came not from the formal instruction, but from the casual comments between my new handlers. I learned that Empress Galaxia had only recently ascended to the throne, following the unexpected death of her predecessor. I learned that the war with the Outer Rim Coalition had been brutal and costly, with billions of lives lost across dozens of worlds. And I learned that the prophesied Celestial Union was widely viewed as the only thing preventing a return to that devastating conflict. "The Empress herself negotiated the peace," said the scaled attendant, while adjusting the fit of a formal tunic I had reluctantly agreed to try on. "She went alone to the Coalition homeworld, against all advice, and did not emerge for 7 standard days. When she did, she carried the peace accords." "Brave," I commented, genuinely impressed. "Necessary," corrected the attendant. "The war could not continue, not after Novanix 7. I recognized the name, a mining colony near the borders of what must be Coalition space. "What happened there?" The attendants fell silent, exchanging uncomfortable glances. "It is not spoken of," the fox being finally said. "But it is why peace was needed at any cost." Before I could press further, the door chimed again. This time, it was a single guard who entered. "Her Luminous Majesty requests your presence. Destined consort." I shrugged off the half-fitted tunic, reclaimed my jacket, and followed the guard through the labyrinthine corridors of what I now understood was not just a ship, but the mobile capital of the seven systems. We eventually arrived at a small, unassuming door, a stark contrast to the grand entrance of the throne room. The guard indicated I should enter, then took up position outside. I stepped through to find myself in what appeared to be a private study. Bookshelves lined the walls, actual physical books, a rarity in most of the galaxy, and a large desk dominated the center of the room. Behind it sat Empress Galaxia, reviewing something on a holographic display that disappeared with a wave of her hand as I entered. "Raiden Quill," she acknowledged. "I trust your accommodations are satisfactory." "The food was excellent," I replied. "The cultural indoctrination, less so." A slight quirk of her lips, Almost a smile, but not quite. Protocol is important in a court as diverse as ours. Without it, we risk constant diplomatic incidents. Like accidentally marrying an empress by eating a hot dog? Precisely. She gestured to a chair across from her desk. Please, sit. We have matters to discuss. I sat, noting that the chair was surprisingly comfortable, adjusted to human physiology, which must have been a deliberate choice. The council has been in session, Galaxia continued, debating our options regarding your situation. And they are divided. Some insist on following tradition to the letter. Others recognize the unusual circumstances and are open to alternatives. She leaned forward slightly. I find myself curious about your perspective. Raiden Quill, what solution would you propose? I considered the question carefully. Honestly, I'd propose you tell everyone it was a mistake. Give me a ship with a full tank of fuel, and let me disappear to the outer reaches where I won't cause any more diplomatic incidents. And the coalition, the peace that hangs in the balance? Is it really peace if it's built on something as flimsy as a ceremonial marriage? Seems to me like they're looking for an excuse to restart the war. Galaxia's starfield eyes studied me intently. Perhaps, or perhaps they truly believe in the prophecy. Many cultures cling to their beliefs, especially in times of uncertainty. Do you? I asked. Believe in the prophecy? She was silent for a long moment. I believe in peace, she finally said. I have seen what happens when it fails. I have walked through the ashes of worlds and heard the silence where billions once lived. I would do much to prevent that horror from recurring. Even marry a stranger? Even that. Her gaze was steady. The question is whether such a step is truly necessary, or if there might be another way to honor the letter of the prophecy while preserving the autonomy we both value. I leaned back in my chair, thinking. What exactly does this prophecy say? What are the specific requirements of this celestial union? The original text is ancient and, like most prophecies, deliberately vague. It speaks of the joining of stars distant and the binding of realms separate. Traditionally, this has been interpreted as marriage between the ruler and one from beyond our systems. But joining and binding could mean a lot of things, I pointed out. An alliance, a treaty, a cultural exchange. Indeed. For the first time, she smiled fully, a transformation that briefly stunned me with its brilliance. That is precisely the argument I have been making to the council. And they remain skeptical. The traditional interpretation has stood for millennia. She sighed, a surprisingly human gesture from someone so otherworldly. But perhaps, with the right demonstration, they could be convinced. What kind of demonstration? That, she said, is what I'm still determining. In the meantime, we must proceed as if the ceremony will take place, to keep the coalition appeased. She rose from her desk. Which brings me to the purpose of this meeting. I wish to see you in a less formal setting, to better understand the human I am supposedly destined to join with. I stood as well. And? What's your assessment? You are not what I expected. Is that good or bad? It is interesting. She moved toward the door, then paused. You should know that I've ordered a full investigation into your background. Standard protocol for anyone who comes into close contact with the throne. I tensed. Find anything interesting? Your record with the Exploration Corps was illuminating. The official report cited moral improvisation outside approved parameters. But the full account shows something more. You diverted critical resources to save a species deemed worthless by every standard metric, at great personal cost. They made beautiful music, I said simply. That seemed worth saving. She studied me with those star-field eyes. You know, in all my years of rule, You are the first person who has looked at me and seen just a person, not an empress or a symbol or a means to power." "Don't sell yourself short," I replied. "I definitely see an empress. Just one who might be as trapped by ridiculous rules as I am." Another almost smile. "Rest, Raiden Quill. Tomorrow will bring new challenges." She opened the door, then added, "And perhaps some answers." As I made my way back to my quarters, escorted by the silent guard, I couldn't help but wonder if I'd just made an ally in the most powerful woman in the galaxy, or if I was being skillfully manipulated by a ruler known for her political acumen. Either way, I had the distinct feeling that my life had irrevocably changed course, and not just because of a hot dog with grilled onions. The following morning brought a new routine and, surprisingly, a measure of freedom. My attendants informed me that I was permitted to move about certain sections of the Imperial flagship, though always accompanied by at least one guard for my protection. Whether they were protecting me from others or others from me remained unclear. I used this newfound mobility to explore the vessel, which I learned was called the Celestial Harmony. It was a city in space, home to over 50,000 beings from across the 7 systems. Most areas were utilitarian: living quarters, workstations, markets, and gardens designed to sustain a diverse population during long voyages. But interspersed were spaces of breathtaking beauty: arboretums filled with bioluminescent plants, meditation chambers with gravity manipulations that allowed visitors to float among holographic stars, and art galleries featuring works from hundreds of worlds. My guard, a stoic being named Thrix with 6 arms and skin like polished obsidian, proved surprisingly informative when asked direct questions. I learned that the Celestial Harmony served not just as the Empress's transport, but as a mobile seat of government, allowing Galaxia to maintain a personal presence throughout her vast dominion. "Her luminous majesty believes in seeing with her own eyes," Thrix explained as we passed through a bustling market area where vendors from a dozen worlds offered their wares. "She travels continuously, never staying in one system longer than necessary." "Doesn't she have a home planet?" I asked. "The throne world, Lumina Prime, is the official capital," Thrix replied. "But the Empress has spent less than 30 standard days there since her ascension 3 years ago." "Always on the move," I mused. "Makes it harder to be assassinated, I suppose." Thrix's expression didn't change, but I sensed a new tension. The Empress faces many threats. Her safety is our highest priority, including protection from accidental husbands. That earned me a look that managed to be disapproving despite Thrix's alien features. "You are an unexpected variable in a complex system, Raiden Quill. Variables must be monitored until their effects are understood." "Fair enough," I conceded. "So where are we headed now? Another session of how to be a consort without really trying." "The Empress has requested your presence in the culinary division." That was unexpected. "The kitchen? Why?" Her luminous majesty did not share her reasoning with me. 20 minutes later, I found myself in what could only be described as a space-age kitchen the size of a small warehouse. Cooking stations of various designs accommodated the needs of different species and food preparation techniques. Chefs and assistants moved with practiced efficiency, preparing meals for the thousands aboard the Celestial Harmony. At the center of this controlled chaos stood Empress Galaxia, looking somewhat out of place in her regal attire. When she spotted me, she gestured me over to a workstation set slightly apart from the others. "Raiden Quill," she greeted me. "I'm told you have experience with Earth cuisine." "I can cook without poisoning myself," I said cautiously. "But I'm no chef. Nevertheless, you possess knowledge that no one else aboard this vessel has." She indicated the workstation, which I now saw was stocked with ingredients that looked remarkably Earth-like. "I wish to learn about the food of your world." I blinked in surprise. You want cooking lessons? I want cultural exchange, she corrected. Food is a universal language, is it not? A way to understand a people's history, values, and daily life. I studied her carefully, trying to discern the real purpose behind this unusual request. Her expression revealed nothing, but there was a tension in her posture that suggested this was more than idle curiosity. All right, I said finally. What would you like to learn how to make? The item that began our situation, the hot dog with grilled onions, as you called it. I couldn't help but laugh. You're serious? Entirely. Okay then, let's make some hot dogs. I surveyed the ingredients available. We'll need a pan for the onions, and some kind of grill for the sausages. What followed was perhaps the most surreal cooking lesson in galactic history. I showed the Empress of the Seven Systems how to slice onions without crying, a trick that worked for humans but proved unnecessary for her species. How to caramelize them slowly for maximum sweetness, and how to grill the sausages to get that perfect snap when bitten. To my surprise, Galaxia proved to be an attentive and capable student. Her movements were precise, her questions insightful, and she adapted quickly to techniques she'd never encountered before. On Earth, I explained as we worked, food like this is considered comfort food, simple, satisfying, connected to memories and emotions rather than prestige or status. In the Seven Systems, she replied, carefully turning a sausage. Food is categorized by nutritional value and cultural significance. The concept of comfort rarely enters the equation. That sounds joyless. She considered this. Perhaps efficiency has been prioritized over experience. That's a shame. Some of life's best moments happen around food that's terrible for you but makes you happy. Like these hot dogs? Exactly like hot dogs, especially at a baseball game or a street fair, eaten outside on a warm day with too many condiments dripping down your arm. A thoughtful expression crossed her face. Your description implies the context matters as much as the food itself. Absolutely. It's not just about taste. It's about the moment, the people you're with, the memories you make. We finished our culinary creation. Perfectly grilled hot dogs nestled in soft buns, topped with caramelized onions that gleamed in the kitchen's bright light. I demonstrated how to add just the right amount of condiments, mustard and ketchup, which the kitchen had reasonable facsimiles of. Galaxia studied the finished product with the same intensity she might bring to a peace treaty. And now we consume it. That's generally the idea with food. Yes. She lifted the hot dog with careful dignity, a gesture that should have looked ridiculous, but somehow didn't, and took a precise bite. I watched her expression, curious about her reaction. For a moment, her imperial composure slipped. Her eyes widened slightly, and something like pleasure flickered across her features before she regained control. This is not what I expected, she said after swallowing. Good. Not expected. Or bad not expected. Good. The combination of textures and flavors is quite complex for something so visually simple. She took another bite, this one with slightly less restraint. I begin to understand why you would risk trespassing for this. I picked up my own hot dog and took a bite. It was surprisingly good. Not exactly like Earth versions, but close enough to trigger a wave of nostalgia for summer cookouts and ballpark outings. You know, I said after finishing my first bite, on Earth, there's an old saying, never trust someone who doesn't like how you take your coffee. The idea is that food preferences are personal. There's no right or wrong way to enjoy something if it makes you happy. An interesting philosophy. She considered her half-eaten hot dog. In the Seven Systems, there are prescribed ways to consume each food for maximum benefit. Deviation is seen as inefficient. No wonder you're always at war, I muttered, then winced, realizing I'd spoken aloud. To my surprise, Galaxia laughed, a sound so unexpected and musical that several nearby kitchen staff momentarily stopped what they were doing. A provocative theory. Raiden Quill. Her starfield eyes sparkled with what might have been amusement. Are you suggesting that galactic peace could be achieved through culinary freedom? I shrugged, relieved she wasn't offended. I'm suggesting that a culture that dictates how people should enjoy their food probably dictates a lot of other personal choices too, and people eventually rebel against that kind of control. She finished her hot dog in thoughtful silence, then wiped her fingers on a napkin with unexpected delicacy. You have given me much to consider. Thank you for this cultural exchange. Happy to help, though I'm still not clear on why the Empress of the Galaxy wanted a cooking lesson from a disgraced pilot. Perhaps I wish to understand what makes a man risk everything for something as simple as food. She met my gaze directly. Or perhaps I wish to understand what makes a man risk everything for creatures that produce nothing but music. Before I could respond, her communication device chimed. She checked it, and her expression hardened back into imperial authority. The council session is beginning. We are both expected to attend. She gestured to an attendant who had materialized nearby. Ensure Raiden Quill is properly attired for formal proceedings. And just like that, the brief moment of connection was over, replaced by the weight of protocol and politics. As I was whisked away to be dressed in ceremonial garments, though I insisted on keeping my leather jacket underneath, I found myself wondering if I'd imagined the genuine interest in her eyes, or if it had been there all along, hidden beneath layers of imperial control. Either way, I was beginning to suspect that Empress Galaxia was as complex and contradictory as the situation we found ourselves in. And perhaps, just perhaps, there was more common ground between us than either of us had initially believed. The council chamber was smaller than the throne room, but no less impressive. Instead of a single throne, a circular table dominated the space, with Galaxia's seat slightly elevated above the others. The councilors were already assembled when we arrived, their conversations falling silent as the Empress entered. I was directed to a seat opposite Galaxia, which felt symbolic in ways I wasn't sure I liked. Once again, the Grand Hierophant sat at her right hand, his milky eyes somehow finding me despite his apparent blindness. The council is now in session, announced the copper-skinned being I now knew was the High Chancellor. Our purpose today is to determine the path forward regarding the Celestial Union. Galaxia spoke before anyone else could. I have a proposal for the Council's consideration. The Grand Hierophant shifted slightly. Your Majesty, the traditional protocols will be honored, she interrupted smoothly, but perhaps reinterpreted for our unique circumstances. She gestured toward me. The prophesied union speaks of joining and binding, but does not specifically mandate marriage as we understand it. I propose a ceremonial alliance, a public commitment to partnership without the full matrimonial implications. Murmurs rippled around the table. I kept my expression neutral, though internally I was impressed by her diplomatic approach. Such an interpretation is unprecedented, said a counselor, with features like carved jade. These are unprecedented times, Galaxia countered, and unprecedented circumstances. The coalition will not accept such a reinterpretation, warned another counselor. They adhere strictly to traditional readings of the prophecy. Then we must convince them, Galaxia said simply. I propose a ceremonial trial, a traditional method for resolving disputes of interpretation. The Grand Hierophant leaned forward. You suggest the trial of shared understanding? It has not been invoked in 7 generations. Yet it remains within our laws and traditions, Galaxia pointed out. Both parties present their understanding of a disputed text before witnesses. If consensus can be reached, It becomes the new accepted interpretation. All eyes turn to me. I cleared my throat. I'm guessing I'm one of the parties in this scenario. You would represent Earth's perspective, Galaxia confirmed. I would represent the seven systems. Together, we would seek a new understanding of the prophecy that satisfies both traditions. And if we can't reach consensus, I asked. Then the traditional interpretation stands, said the Grand Hierophant, a note of satisfaction in his ancient voice. And the full marriage ceremony must proceed. I considered the proposal. It wasn't freedom, but it was a chance, possibly my only chance to avoid either a forced marriage or execution. I accept. The council must vote on whether to allow the trial, the High Chancellor reminded everyone. What followed was a heated debate that lasted nearly 2 hours. Councillors argued passionately about tradition versus pragmatism, about the sanctity of prophecy versus the realities of governance. Throughout it all, Galaxia remained calm but firm, addressing each concern with measured responses that acknowledged the importance of tradition while emphasizing the need for flexibility. Finally, the High Chancellor called for a vote. It was close, 6 in favor, 5 against, with 1 abstention. The trial of shared understanding would proceed. The trial will commence at the next alignment, the High Chancellor announced. Both parties will have until then to prepare their interpretations. As is traditional, they will be sequestered separately with access only to the original texts and their own counsel. Galaxia nodded her acceptance. There is one additional matter. The coalition must be informed of our decision to invoke the trial. They are entitled to send observers, as are all major powers affected by the interpretation. I will see to it, Your Majesty, the High Chancellor promised. As the council dispersed, Galaxia approached me. You did well, she said quietly. I didn't do anything except sit there, I pointed out. Sometimes, that is the hardest thing to do in politics. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Your guards will escort you to the preparation chamber. You will find all the relevant texts translated into your language. Study them carefully. Our success depends on finding a genuine alternative interpretation that honors the spirit of the prophecy. No pressure, then. Indeed. She hesitated, then added, Raiden Quill, regardless of the outcome, I want you to know that I appreciate your willingness to engage with our traditions, rather than simply dismissing them. Well, my alternatives were marriage or death, so, nevertheless, she placed a hand briefly on my arm, the first time she had voluntarily touched me. Good luck. The preparation chamber turned out to be a comfortable study, similar to Galaxia's own, with the addition of a sleeping alcove and refreshment station. The walls were lined with holographic displays showing the prophecy texts in multiple languages, including, thankfully, standard Earth English. I spent hours poring over the ancient words, trying to make sense of flowery metaphors and deliberately ambiguous phrasing. The core text of the prophecy was frustratingly vague. When the third star of Lyrian aligns with the distant void, the joining of stars, separate shall bring harmony to discord. The one who takes the offering becomes bound to the throne, and through this binding, peace shall reign in realms divided. Traditional interpretations, helpfully annotated in the margins, defined joining as marriage and binding as the formal consort ceremony. But the original text itself never used those specific terms. As I was contemplating this, there was a chime at the door. A guard entered, followed by a small anti-gravity platform bearing a covered tray. Sustenance, the guard announced. Prepared according to your cultural specifications. I lifted the cover to find, to my surprise, another hot dog with grilled onions, prepared exactly as I had shown Galaxia earlier that day. Alongside it was a note in elegant script. Cultural exchange continues. May it inspire interpretation. Gee. I smiled despite myself. The Empress was clever, finding a way to communicate despite the rule of sequestration, under the guise of appropriate cultural accommodation. I ate the hot dog thoughtfully, considering the nature of cultural understanding. In the core, I had visited dozens of worlds, each with its own customs and beliefs. The successful explorers weren't those who imposed their own values or blindly adopted alien ones, but those who found the common ground between different perspectives. Binding didn't have to mean marriage. It could mean alliance, partnership, mutual respect. Joining could be a meeting of minds rather than a legal union. With renewed energy, I returned to the texts, searching for precedents and alternative readings that might support a less literal interpretation. By the time exhaustion finally drove me to the sleeping alcove, I had the beginnings of an argument that might, just might, satisfy both tradition and my desire for freedom. The trial of shared understanding began with all the pomp and ceremony I had come to expect from Seven Systems governance. The chamber designated for the proceedings was circular, with tiered seating surrounding a central platform where Galaxia and I would present our interpretations. I was dressed in formal attire that managed to combine elements of Earth fashion with Seven Systems ceremonial design, and, at my insistence, incorporated my leather jacket as an essential cultural artifact. The overall effect was probably ridiculous, but I had bigger concerns than fashion. The chamber was filled to capacity. Council members occupied the front row, with diplomatic representatives from various systems behind them. A delegation from the Outer Rim Coalition was present as well, 3 of the sentient thundercloud beings, contained within specialized environment fields that crackled with energy. Galaxia entered last, wearing ceremonial robes that seemed to capture and reflect light in mesmerizing patterns. She took her place opposite me on the central platform, her expression serene but determined. The Grand Hierophant rose to open the proceedings. We gather to witness the trial of shared understanding, an ancient practice for resolving disputes of interpretation. Both parties will present their understanding of the prophecy of celestial union. Through respectful dialogue, they will seek consensus on its true meaning for our time. He turned to Galaxia. Her luminous majesty will speak first, as is tradition. Galaxia stepped forward, her robes shimmering with her movement. The prophecy speaks of the joining of stars, separate, and binding to the throne. For generations, we have understood these phrases to mean matrimonial union between ruler and consort. This interpretation has served us well in times past. She paused, surveying the assembled dignitaries. But prophecies, by their nature, contain layers of meaning that reveal themselves according to the needs of the time. In our present circumstances, with peace newly established but fragile, I propose that the joining the prophecy speaks of is not merely between 2 individuals, but between 2 approaches to governance. Murmurs rippled through the audience. I listened intently as Galaxia continued. Raiden Quill represents a tradition that values individual moral judgment, what his people call conscience, over rigid adherence to predetermined ethical algorithms. Our system, by contrast, prizes consistency and impartiality through application of established principles. The prophecy calls for these 2 stars, these 2 philosophical approaches, to join in harmony. She gestured toward me. The binding to the throne need not be matrimonial. It can be advisory, representational, a commitment to incorporate this different perspective into our governance. Through this interpretation, the spirit of the prophecy is honored while acknowledging the unique circumstances of its fulfillment. The Grand Hierophant nodded. The human will now present his understanding. I stepped forward, suddenly very aware of how many important beings were staring at me. Public speaking had never been my forte, but I'd faced worse situations. Probably. Where I come from, I began. We have a saying, the letter kills, but the spirit gives life. It means that rigid adherence to rules without understanding their purpose often defeats the very aims those rules were created to serve. I gestured to the holographic display of the prophecy text hovering between Galaxia and me. This prophecy was clearly intended to ensure peace and harmony. But forcing two strangers into marriage against their will creates neither peace nor harmony. It creates resentment and resistance. One of the coalition representatives rumbled ominously, but I pressed on. In Earth history, political marriages were common for centuries. They joined royal houses and ended wars, on paper. But they rarely created genuine peace, just temporary cessations of conflict. I met Galaxia's gaze across the platform. True peace comes from genuine understanding and respect between different peoples and perspectives. I indicated the specific wording of the prophecy. The text speaks of joining and binding, but it doesn't specify how. On Earth, we form many kinds of bonds, friendship, alliance, mutual respect, that are every bit as strong as marriage, sometimes stronger. I turned to address the coalition representatives directly. You value the precise fulfillment of the prophecy. I respect that. But consider that its true purpose, peace between different realms, might be better served by a union of minds and purposes rather than a forced matrimonial arrangement. The chamber was silent as I concluded. I propose that the binding to the throne be interpreted as the establishment of a formal advisory role, an Earth perspective incorporated into Seven Systems governance, representing those values of individual conscience and moral improvisation that I apparently triggered by stealing a hot dog. This last line earned a few chuckles from the audience, though the coalition representatives remained ominously silent. The Grand Hierophant stepped forward again. The presentations are complete. Now begins the dialogue portion of the trial, where the parties seek common ground. What followed was 2 hours of intense philosophical and semantic debate. Galaxia and I examined every word of the prophecy, discussed historical precedents for reinterpretation, and proposed various frameworks for fulfilling the prophecy's purpose without requiring marriage. To my surprise, we worked well together. Galaxia's vast knowledge of Seven Systems law and tradition complemented my more instinctive, humanistic approach. When I would make a point about personal autonomy, she would find a precedent in their own legal tradition that supported it. When she would reference a specific cultural requirement, I would suggest an Earth equivalent that might satisfy the same need. Gradually, a new interpretation began to take shape, one that honored tradition while creating space for innovation. Finally, the Grand Hierophant called for the consensus declaration. Have the parties reached a shared understanding of the prophecy's meaning for our time? Galaxia and I exchanged glances. We have, she confirmed. Then let it be declared before all witnesses. We had agreed that Galaxia would deliver the formal declaration, her status lending weight to the new interpretation. She stepped to the center of the platform, her voice clear and commanding. The prophecy of celestial union speaks of joining and binding for the purpose of peace. We interpret this to mean the establishment of a new role within the Seven Systems governance, the ambassador of conscience, bound to the throne not by marriage, but by oath and purpose, representing the perspective of individual moral judgment within our collective decision-making processes. She turned slightly toward me. Raiden Quill, as the one who triggered the prophecy, would be the first to hold this position, serving as advisor and counterbalance to ensure our laws serve not just order, but justice, not just efficiency, but humanity. The Grand Hierophant looked skeptical. And you believe this interpretation satisfies the requirements of the prophecy? It joins what was separate, Galaxia replied firmly. It binds a new perspective to governance, and it serves the prophecy's ultimate purpose, lasting peace through genuine understanding. The chamber erupted in murmurs as dignitaries debated the proposed interpretation. The coalition representatives conferred among themselves, their thundercloud forms crackling with energy. Finally, the lead coalition representative floated forward. "This is unexpected," it rumbled. "But the coalition recognizes that prophecies contain mysteries that reveal themselves in time. If the human is truly bound to the seven systems through formal oath and obligation, we will accept this interpretation, conditionally." "What condition?" Galaxia asked. "The human must demonstrate genuine commitment to this role. He must remain within the seven systems. He must participate in governance, and he must do so not under compulsion but by choice." The thundercloud crackled ominously. "Otherwise, the traditional interpretation stands." All eyes turned to me. This wasn't exactly freedom. I would still be bound to the seven systems, still involved in their politics and governance. But it wasn't forced marriage either. It was a compromise. "I accept," I said, "on one condition of my own." The Grand Hierophant frowned. "The human cannot impose conditions on the trial's outcome." "Actually," Galaxia interjected, "the original protocols state that all parties must freely accept the new interpretation. Raiden Quill is entitled to state his terms." The Grand Hierophant conceded, with visible reluctance. "Speak your condition, human." I took a deep breath. "I'll serve as this ambassador of conscience, but I want the freedom to travel throughout the seven systems, and beyond, to truly understand the peoples and cultures I'm supposed to represent. I can't be an effective advisor if I'm confined to the Imperial Court." Galaxia nodded slowly. "That is reasonable, and consistent with the role's purpose. And," I added, "I keep my ship, and my jacket." A flicker of amusement crossed her face. "Agreed." The Grand Hierophant raised his hands. "Let it be recorded that a new interpretation has been reached through the trial of shared understanding. The prophecy of celestial union shall henceforth be understood to foretell the establishment of the ambassador of conscience, bound to the throne by oath rather than matrimony." A sense of relief washed over me. I hadn't won complete freedom, but I had avoided both marriage and execution, and potentially gained a position where I might actually do some good. The formal ceremony concluded with Galaxia and I drinking from the same ceremonial chalice, a symbolic sharing of understanding rather than the traditional wedding ritual it would have preceded. As the assembled dignitaries dispersed, Galaxia approached me. "Ambassador Quill," she said, with that almost smile I was beginning to recognize. "Our first diplomatic success together. Let's hope it's not the last," I replied, though I'm still not entirely sure what I've gotten myself into. "Neither am I," she admitted, surprising me with her candor. "This is uncharted territory for both of us, but perhaps that's appropriate for a former exploration pilot and an Empress who rarely stays in one place." "Speaking of which," I said, "when do I get my ship back? I have some exploring to do as part of my new ambassadorial duties." "Soon," she promised. "But first, there are formalities to complete, and you should familiarize yourself with the basics of your new role." "More royal boot camp?" "More cultural exchange," she corrected, "in both directions. I still have much to learn about Earth cuisine, after all." I laughed. "Hot dogs are just the beginning. Wait until you try pizza." For just a moment, the weight of empire seemed to lift from her shoulders, and I glimpsed the person beneath the Empress, curious, intelligent, and perhaps a little lonely. "I look forward to it, Ambassador Quill." As we walked together out of the ceremonial chamber, I reflected on the strange path that had led me here, from disgraced pilot to hot dog thief to almost husband to galactic ambassador, all in the space of a few days. Life, as always, had surprised me, and for once, I wasn't complaining about it. The formal establishment of my role as ambassador of conscience proceeded with surprising speed. Within days, the imperial legal team had drafted the necessary decrees. The council had ratified them, some members more enthusiastically than others, and announcements had been sent throughout the 7 systems. My first official act was to swear an oath of service, not to Galaxia personally, but to the principles of justice and compassion I was meant to represent. The ceremony was brief and, at my insistence, conducted without excessive pomp. Just Galaxia, the council, and me in my leather jacket, promising to speak truth to power and defend the rights of the overlooked. "You realize," Galaxia said afterward, as we walked through one of the ship's arboretums, "that you've created a role with significant influence but almost no clear guidelines." "I thought that was the point," I replied, pausing to examine a plant that resembled a cross between a fern and a jellyfish. Hard to put conscience in a box with rigid parameters. True, but it presents challenges for integration into existing governance structures. I shrugged. "We'll figure it out as we go. That's how conscience works, adapting to each situation as it arises." She gave me a sidelong glance. "You seem remarkably unconcerned about the complexities of interstellar politics for someone who just became a key figure in them." "I'm terrified," I admitted cheerfully. "But I've found that pretending confidence sometimes creates the real thing. Besides, I don't have to solve everything at once. I just have to start somewhere." "And where will you start, Ambassador Quill?" I considered the question seriously. "I want to visit Novanix 7. Galaxia stopped walking abruptly. "That is not advisable. It's the place no one will talk about. The reason you negotiated peace at any cost. If I'm going to understand what I'm fighting to prevent, I need to see it." "There is nothing to see," she said softly. "That is the point." "Then I need to see the nothing." I met her gaze steadily. "I can't advocate effectively for peace if I don't understand the consequences of its absence." She was silent for a long moment, her star-filled eyes unreadable. "Very well," she finally said, "but I will accompany you." "Is that wise? The Empress visiting a devastated world?" "The Empress was responsible for its devastation," she replied, with such quiet intensity that I took a step back. "It is not a burden I can or should delegate." Before I could respond to this revelation, her communication device chimed. She checked it, her expression turning grim. "The Council demands an emergency session. There are complications with the Coalition." The emergency session revealed that complications was a significant understatement. The Coalition was claiming that our interpretation of the prophecy, while technically acceptable, required immediate demonstration of its effectiveness. They demand proof that this new arrangement truly brings harmony to discord, the High Chancellor explained. They have proposed a test, a disputed territory at the border of Coalition and 7 system space. If the ambassador can resolve the conflict there, to both sides' satisfaction, they will fully accept our interpretation. "And if not?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. "Then they will consider the prophecy unfulfilled and the peace accords void." Galaxia's expression remained impassive, but I was beginning to recognize the subtle signs of her concern. A slight tension around her eyes, a barely perceptible straightening of her posture. "What is the nature of the dispute?" she asked. The jade-featured counselor activated a holographic display showing a small planetoid orbiting a dwarf star. Araxis Minor, technically within Coalition space, but historically claimed by the 7th system due to its unique mineral composition, specifically crystalline formations, used in our long-range communication technology. "And the Coalition suddenly needs these crystals too?" I guessed. "They claim to, yes," the counselor confirmed. "Though our intelligence suggests their interest is primarily strategic rather than practical." "A trap, then," I said bluntly. They're setting me up to fail so they can declare the prophecy unfulfilled." "That assessment seems accurate," agreed the High Chancellor. "Yet we cannot refuse the challenge without appearing to validate their concerns." I glanced at Galaxia, who had remained uncharacteristically silent. "What do you think, Your Majesty?" She met my gaze, her star-field eyes thoughtful. "I think, Ambassador Quill, that this is precisely why your role was created, to find a third path where others see only two opposing options." "No pressure," I muttered. "You have 3 standard days to prepare," the High Chancellor informed me. "A diplomatic vessel will transport you to Araxis Minor, where representatives from both the Coalition and the 7 systems will await your proposed resolution." As the council dispersed, Galaxia and I remained behind. "I should warn you," she said quietly, "that the Coalition negotiators are notoriously inflexible. They operate on pure logic with no consideration for what humans would call empathy or compromise." "Sounds like the Corps' ethical algorithms," I replied. "All calculation, no heart." "Precisely. And they will expect you to fail." "Good," I smiled grimly. "I do my best work when people underestimate me." She studied me for a moment, then said something that surprised me. "I believe you will succeed, Raiden Quill." "That makes one of us. You succeeded in saving the jellyfish violins, when all rational calculations said they were worthless. You succeeded in avoiding both execution and unwanted marriage when those seemed the only options." A hint of that almost smile appeared. "And you succeeded in teaching an Empress how to grill onions without crying. Perhaps small achievements in the grand scheme of things, but they suggest a pattern of finding solutions where others see none." I was touched by her confidence, unexpected as it was. "Thank you, Your Majesty." "Galaxia," she said suddenly, "when we are not in formal settings, I would prefer you use my name rather than my title." "Galaxia," I repeated, testing the feel of it without the honorifics. "Then you should call me Raiden." "Raiden," she agreed. "Now, Ambassador, I suggest you begin your preparations. The fate of peace may well rest on your ability to resolve an impossible situation in 3 days." When you put it that way, how could I refuse? The 3 days passed in a blur of research, planning, and increasingly desperate brainstorming. I learned everything I could about Araxis Minor, about coalition negotiation tactics, about the specific crystalline formations that were the center of the dispute. The facts were straightforward. The crystals were rare and valuable. Both sides had legitimate claims. Traditional diplomacy would suggest splitting the resource or establishing a joint mining operation, solutions the coalition had already rejected as inefficient. I needed something different, something that spoke to the heart of what both sides truly needed, not just what they claimed to want. The inspiration came, ironically, from a casual conversation with Thrix, who had remained my primary guard even after my status changed from prisoner to ambassador. "The crystals are valued for their resonance patterns," Thrix explained as we reviewed technical specifications. "They naturally amplify and clarify communication signals across vast distances." "Like the jellyfish violins," I murmured, remembering how their translucent bodies had amplified and transformed sound waves into haunting melodies. "Pardon, Ambassador?" "The species I saved. They had bodies that resonated with sound waves, created music just by moving." An idea began to form. "Thrix, do we have any information on the crystalline formation's response to different types of energy? Not just communication signals, but other frequencies?" That question led to a frantic day of research, culminating in a hastily arranged experiment in one of the ship's laboratories. By the time I boarded the diplomatic vessel bound for Araxis Minor, I had a plan, audacious, possibly insane, but definitely original. And if there's one thing I've learned in my years of bending rules and improvising solutions, it's that originality counts for a lot when conventional approaches fail. Araxes Minor looked unimpressive from orbit, a small, rocky planetoid with minimal atmosphere and no surface water. But its unremarkable appearance belied its importance. As we descended toward the designated landing zone, I could see the crystalline formations breaking through the surface, like massive glass shards reflecting the dwarf star's reddish light. The diplomatic compound was a collection of prefabricated structures, arranged around a central meeting facility. Representatives from both the Coalition and the Seven Systems had already arrived, establishing separate camps on opposite sides of the compound in a physical manifestation of their divided positions. I was greeted by a Seven Systems delegation led by a diplomatic officer named Vela, who quickly briefed me on the latest developments. The Coalition representatives are insisting on exclusive mining rights, she explained as we walked toward my temporary quarters. They claim the planetoid's position within their territorial space is definitive. And our position, historical precedent, and specific need. The crystals are integral to our communication network in ways they are not for Coalition technology. She gave me a sideways glance. Ambassador, I must warn you that expectations for your success are limited. I've noticed that's a common theme, I replied dryly. When do negotiations begin? Tomorrow at first light. Both parties have agreed to present their positions, after which you will have one standard day to propose a resolution. 1 day? That's not much time for diplomacy. It is not intended to be, she said bluntly. The Coalition expects failure. I nodded, unsurprised. I'll need access to the crystal formations before the formal negotiations begin. That may be difficult. Access to the resource is the very thing being disputed. I'm not going to mine anything. I just need to conduct a simple experiment to confirm my theory. I smiled reassuringly. Tell them it's an Earth custom for mediators to commune with the disputed territory. It's not even entirely a lie. Vela looked skeptical, but agreed to arrange it. To my surprise, permission was granted, perhaps because both sides were confident in my eventual failure and saw no harm in humoring the strange human custom. That evening, as Araxes Minor's surface cooled in the absence of its sun, I found myself standing alone among the crystalline formations, carrying a small case of equipment borrowed from the diplomatic vessel's science lab. The crystals rose around me like frozen waterfalls, their surfaces faceted and complex, reflecting the starlight in hypnotic patterns. I set up my equipment carefully, a series of small resonance emitters and highly sensitive recording devices. Then, taking a deep breath, I activated the sequence I had programmed based on my research. The emitters began broadcasting at specific frequencies, sending carefully calibrated sound waves into the crystal formations. For several minutes, nothing happened beyond the equipment recording the crystal's response patterns. Then, just as I was beginning to doubt my theory, it happened. The crystals began to vibrate, almost imperceptibly at first, then with increasing intensity, and they began to produce sound, not just echoes of my emitters, but harmonics and overtones that built upon each other, creating complex, ethereal music unlike anything I had ever heard. I stood transfixed as the crystal forest sang around me, the melody shifting and evolving as the formations responded to each other, creating a naturally occurring symphony that resonated through my very bones. It was beautiful, alien, and utterly mesmerizing. When I finally switched off the emitters, the echoes of the crystal song lingered in the air for several minutes before fading to silence. I packed up my equipment with hands that trembled slightly from excitement. I had my solution. The formal negotiations began the next morning in the central facility, a circular room with 3 distinct sections, one for the coalition representatives, one for the Seven Systems delegation, and a neutral central area where I would conduct the proceedings. The coalition was represented by 3 of the thundercloud beings, contained within their environmental fields, plus 2 solid-form associates of species I didn't recognize. The Seven Systems delegation consisted of 6 officials of various species, all wearing the formal attire of imperial diplomats. I opened the session wearing my leather jacket over the formal ambassador's robes, a sartorial compromise that seemed fitting for my role as bridge between different worlds. Representatives of the coalition and the Seven Systems, I began. I thank you for allowing me to mediate this dispute. Before you present your formal positions, I would like to share something I discovered last night. I activated the recording device I had set up in the center of the room. The haunting music of the crystal formations filled the chamber, complex and beautiful, building to a crescendo that seemed to vibrate the very air. When the recording ended, the room was silent. Even the coalition representatives, usually in constant motion within their thundercloud forms, had gone still. What you just heard, I explained, is the natural resonance pattern of the crystalline formations on Araxis Minor when stimulated at specific frequencies. In effect, these crystals don't just transmit communication signals, they create music. This is unexpected, admitted the lead coalition representative, its voice rumbling through its translator. Our analyses did not reveal this property. Nor did ours, said the head of the Seven Systems delegation. How did you discover this, Ambassador? By looking for connection rather than division, I replied. These crystals reminded me of another species I once encountered, one that produced music through similar resonance principles. I wondered if the same might be true here, and it was. I moved to the center of the room. The dispute over Araxis Minor has been framed as a binary choice. Either the coalition controls the resource, or the Seven Systems does. But I propose a third option, one that honors both claims while serving a higher purpose. I activated a holographic display showing my proposal. Araxis Minor should be designated as a cultural heritage site, jointly protected by both the coalition and the Seven Systems. The crystal formations would remain intact and unmined, preserved as a natural wonder, and studied for their unique properties. Predictable objections followed immediately. This fails to address our need for communication technology, argued the Seven Systems delegate, and ignores our territorial sovereignty, added the coalition representative. I held up my hands for quiet. Please, hear me out. The crystal's value as a communication resource comes from their resonance patterns, patterns we now know create natural music. Rather than destroying these formations through mining, I propose we study how to reproduce or amplify these patterns artificially. I displayed the preliminary data I had gathered. My findings suggest that the resonance properties could potentially be replicated in laboratory conditions, possibly even enhanced. Both the Coalition and the Seven Systems would share research facilities on Araxis Minor, working together to develop technology based on the crystals without destroying them. Joint research? The Coalition representatives' form darkened with skepticism. Our technological approaches are fundamentally incompatible. Exactly, I said, surprising them. And that's the greatest opportunity here. Your different approaches could lead to breakthroughs neither would achieve alone. The Coalition's logical precision combined with the Seven Systems' integrative methodology could revolutionize communication technology across both territories. I let that sink in, then continued. But beyond the practical benefits, there's something more important at stake. These crystal formations are unique in the known galaxy. They're not just resources to be exploited. They're wonders to be preserved, studied, and appreciated. They're living art. I played the recording again, letting the hauntingly beautiful music fill the chamber. This is what we risk losing if we reduce these formations to mere components. Instead, We could establish Araxis Minor as the first joint cultural preserve, a symbol of what can be created when former enemies choose collaboration over competition. The room fell silent as both delegations considered my proposal. I could see the coalition representatives communing with each other through electrical discharges within their cloud forms. The Seven Systems delegates were having a more subtle discussion through their neural implants, but the slight movements of their eyes gave it away. Finally, the lead coalition representative moved forward. "Your proposal is unconventional, Ambassador Quill." "As is my role," I replied with a slight smile. "We require time to evaluate the scientific validity of your claims about artificial replication of the crystal properties." "Of course," I nodded. "I've prepared detailed reports of my findings for both delegations to review." The head of the Seven Systems delegation spoke next. "The Empress authorized us to consider creative solutions, but this goes beyond our expected parameters. We must consult with the Council." "I understand," I said. "May I suggest both delegations take 24 hours to review the data and consult with your respective authorities? We can reconvene tomorrow to discuss any modifications to the proposal." They agreed, and the session adjourned. As the delegates filed out, I caught fragments of conversation that suggested my proposal had, at minimum, disrupted their expectations and forced new thinking, which was exactly what I had hoped for. That evening, I received a secure communication from Galaxia. Her image appeared in my quarters, projected with the clarity that suggested she was using the very crystal technology we were discussing. "Ambassador Quill," she greeted me formally, then softened. "Raiden, I've received the preliminary report from our delegation. Your solution is unexpected. But not unwelcome, I hope." A slight smile. "It has merit, both practical and symbolic. The Council is divided, but not along the lines I anticipated. Some who I expected to oppose any compromise are intrigued by the research possibilities. And you? What does the Empress think?" Her star-field eyes met mine through the projection. "The Empress thinks it serves the interests of peace while maintaining dignity for both sides. But Galaxia..." She paused, something vulnerable crossing her face. "Galaxia is impressed by the beauty you found where others saw only utility. It reminds me of the jellyfish violins." "That was my inspiration," I admitted. "Sometimes the most valuable things aren't the ones we can use, but the ones that move us." "A very human perspective," she observed. "And perhaps what our systems have been missing." She straightened slightly, becoming more the Empress again. "The Council has authorized our delegation to accept your proposal, with minor modifications regarding research jurisdiction. I believe the Coalition is similarly inclined, though they will certainly demand adjustments to assert their territorial claims. As long as the crystals remain protected and the research is truly collaborative, the details are negotiable." She nodded. "I look forward to your return to discuss the implications of your success. It seems the Ambassador of Conscience has proven his value more quickly than even I anticipated." After she signed off, I sat for a long time looking out at the crystal formations, visible from my window as dark silhouettes against the night sky. Tomorrow would bring hard negotiations over details, but the fundamental principle had been accepted: preservation over exploitation, collaboration over competition. It wasn't world peace or universal harmony. It was just one small dispute resolved without violence or domination. But sometimes, that's how larger change begins, with a single example of a better way forward. The next day's negotiations were intense, but productive. As expected, both sides insisted on modifications to my proposal. The Coalition demanded recognition of their territorial sovereignty over Araxis Minor, while the Seven Systems pushed for priority access to research outcomes related to communication technology. What surprised me was how both delegations seemed to take the preservation of the crystal formations as a given. My demonstration of their musical properties had shifted the fundamental frame of the dispute from who gets to mine them to how do we study them without destroying them. By the end of the day, we had a framework agreement. Araxis Minor would be designated a joint cultural heritage site, with territorial sovereignty remaining with the coalition, but management shared between both powers. Research facilities would be established to study the crystal formation's properties, with a commitment to developing synthetic alternatives for technological applications. And, in a detail I found particularly satisfying, regular concerts of crystal music would be broadcast across both territories as a symbol of harmonious cooperation. When I returned to the Celestial Harmony 3 days later, I was greeted with formal honors, an uncomfortable experience for someone who had spent years avoiding official attention. But beneath the ceremony, I sensed a genuine shift in how I was perceived. The council members who had viewed my appointment with skepticism now regarded me with cautious respect. The coalition had officially accepted our interpretation of the prophecy, removing the immediate threat of renewed conflict. And Galaxia. Galaxia met me not in the throne room, but in her private study, where we had first begun to see each other as individuals rather than symbols. "You've changed things," she said without preamble as I entered. "The Council is already receiving requests from other systems for the Ambassador of Conscience to mediate disputes." "Is that good or bad?" I asked, settling into what I now thought of as my chair across from her desk. "It's significant." She studied me with those star-field eyes. "You've created a new type of power within our system, one based neither on military strength nor economic leverage, but on the ability to see beyond established parameters." I just applied a little Earth perspective to a rigid situation. "Perhaps, but it raises an important question about our next steps." She rose and moved to stand by the window, looking out at the streaking stars of hyperspace. "The Coalition has accepted our interpretation of the prophecy. You fulfilled your obligation under the agreement. You could, if you wished, return to your previous life." The offer caught me by surprise. "Are you trying to get rid of me already?" She turned, and I was startled to see uncertainty in her expression, an emotion I hadn't observed in her before. "On the contrary, I'm acknowledging your right to choose. Your freedom was taken from you by circumstance. Now that the immediate crisis has passed, that choice should be restored." I considered her words carefully. Return to my previous life? Drifting between marginal jobs, always one step ahead of core enforcement, eating nutrient capsules and sleeping in whatever berth I could afford. It had been freedom of a sort, but a lonely, aimless kind. "What if I choose to stay?" I asked. "To continue as Ambassador of Conscience." Something flickered in her eyes. Relief? Pleasure? It was gone too quickly to identify. "Then the 7 systems would be fortunate to retain your perspective, and we would proceed with our planned visit to Novanix 7, as you requested." "You remembered." "I remember everything, Raiden." Her voice was soft. "Especially promises." 2 days later, we departed for Novanix 7, not on the Celestial Harmony, but on a small, unmarked diplomatic vessel with minimal crew. Galaxia had insisted on traveling incognito, without the usual trappings of imperial presence. "This is not a state visit," she explained as we boarded. "This is personal." The journey was lengthy, taking us to the very edge of 7 Systems territory. I used the time to learn more about Novanix 7, though information was frustratingly scarce. It had been a mining colony of moderate size and importance, home to approximately 3 million beings of various species. Its primary export had been rare mineral compounds used in advanced propulsion systems. During the war, it had been targeted by the Coalition for its strategic value. The 7 systems had defended it fiercely. And then, suddenly, all records stopped. The official accounts merely stated that Novanix 7 had been neutralized as a strategic asset, following catastrophic conflict escalation. What really happened? I asked Galaxia, as we sat in the vessel's small common area, watching the stars streak by. Everyone goes silent when Novanix 7 is mentioned. She was quiet for so long, I thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, stripped of imperial authority, laden with something that might have been grief. The Coalition deployed a new weapon, a targeted waveform that destabilized molecular bonds in specific elements. It was meant to render the mining facilities unusable without harming the population. She looked down at her hands. It worked differently than they expected. The destabilization cascaded through connected molecular structures, including organic compounds. I felt cold as the implications became clear. The people disintegrated, she said simply. Along with all structures, technology, and biological matter, 3 million lives ended in approximately 7 minutes. When it was over, nothing remained but bare rock and residual energy signatures. Horror washed over me. That's genocide. The Coalition claimed it was an unintended effect, that they had tested the weapon on uninhabited worlds without observing the cascade reaction. Her voice was clinical now, distanced, as if the only way to relate such atrocity was to separate herself from it emotionally. Our scientists believe the unique mineral composition of Novanix 7 created conditions that amplified the effect exponentially. Accident or not, 3 million people were killed. Yes. She finally looked up, her starfield eyes haunted. I was the regional commander responsible for that sector. The decision to defend Novanix 7, rather than evacuate the population, was mine. When reports of the new weapon reached us, I had 19 minutes to order an evacuation. I hesitated, believing our defenses would hold. By the time I gave the order, it was too late. The weight of her confession hung in the air between us. I understood now why she had insisted on accompanying me, why this visit was personal. She carried the burden of those lost lives. Is that why you negotiated peace personally? Why you were willing to accept the prophecy, even if it meant marrying a stranger? She nodded. After Novanix 7, I knew the war could not continue. Each escalation brought new horrors, new weapons that killed more efficiently. Someone had to break the cycle, whatever the cost. She met my gaze directly. So I went alone to the Coalition homeworld, without protection or imperial authority, and I did not leave until they agreed to peace terms. That was brave, I said softly. It was necessary, she echoed her attendant's words from days earlier. As was accepting the prophecy's activation, even when it came in such an unexpected form. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Though I admit, when I learned the destined consort was a human who had stolen ceremonial food, I briefly questioned whether the universe itself was mocking me. The universe does have a strange sense of humor, I agreed, trying to lighten the heaviness between us. Though I maintain it was a hot dog, not ceremonial food. Her smile strengthened slightly, then faded. We will reach Novanix 7 tomorrow. I should warn you, there is truly nothing to see. No ruins, no memorial, no evidence that millions once lived there. Just emptiness where life should be. Sometimes emptiness says more than any monument could, I replied. I need to see it, to understand what we're working to prevent. She nodded, then rose to leave. At the doorway, she paused. Raiden. Thank you. For what? For choosing to stay. For creating a solution on Araxis Minor that preserved both peace and beauty. Her voice softened. For seeing people where others see only utility or obstacle. Before I could respond, she was gone, leaving me to contemplate the terrible weight she carried and the unexpected bond forming between us. a bond forged not through prophecy or ceremony, but through shared purpose and growing understanding. Novanix 7 was exactly as Galaxia had described. Nothing. As our ship entered orbit, the viewing screens showed a barren planetoid. Its surface, an uninterrupted expanse of gray-brown rock with no sign that anything had ever lived there. No ruins, no debris fields, not even impact craters where buildings had stood. Just smooth, featureless terrain stretching to every horizon. We landed near what had once been the main settlement. Standing on the surface was a disorienting experience. The gravity felt right. The atmosphere, supplemented by our portable fields, was breathable. But there was a profound wrongness to the place. No sound except the wind. No movement except dust devils spinning across the empty plain. No life, not even at the microbial level. According to our scanners, Galaxia stood beside me, her imperial composure firmly in place, though I could sense the tension radiating from her. She had changed from her formal attire into a simple environmental suit that matched mine, making us indistinguishable except for our physical differences. The colony center was here, she said, indicating the featureless ground before us. Approximately 20,000 permanent residents, with the rest distributed among outlying mining facilities. I tried to imagine it. Streets, buildings, people going about their lives. But the emptiness was so complete, it defeated visualization. No recovery mission? No attempt to, I don't know, collect remains? There were no remains to collect, she replied quietly. The molecular destabilization was complete. Even the soil was affected to a depth of several meters. Nothing remained except the basic planetary structure. We walked in silence across the barren surface. My environmental sensors registered no radiation, no toxins, nothing that would prevent life from existing here. It was simply gone, erased so thoroughly, it was as if it had never been. After a while, Galaxia stopped and knelt, placing her palm flat against the ground. The gesture was so unexpected, so human in its need for physical connection to grief, that I found myself kneeling beside her. "This is why," she said, her voice barely audible even through our comm system. "This is why I accepted the prophecy, why I was willing to marry a stranger, why I negotiated with enemies who had done this. Because the alternative was more of this, more emptiness where there should be life." I placed my hand on the ground next to hers. The rock was smooth, almost polished, unlike any natural formation. "I understand now." "Do you?" She looked at me, her face visible through her helmet's clear front, her star-field eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't name. 3 million lives ended because of political calculations and military strategy. Because both sides believed their cause justified escalation. Because I made a wrong decision based on incomplete information. You couldn't have known what would happen. No. But I knew we were in a war where both sides were developing increasingly devastating weapons. I knew civilian populations were at risk. I made a strategic choice that prioritized military advantage over human lives. Her voice was steady, but laced with old pain. That is the burden of governance, Raiden. Decisions that affect millions, made by individuals with limited perspective and their own biases. I understood then why she had been intrigued by my role as ambassador of conscience, why she had supported the new interpretation of the prophecy. She wanted, needed, a voice that would challenge the cold calculations of strategic thinking, that would insist on seeing people rather than statistics. "This is why you created my position," I said. "Not just to satisfy the prophecy, but because you wanted someone who would question decisions like the one you made here." She nodded. "The ethical algorithms that govern our decisions are logical, consistent, and utterly incapable of moral improvisation. They cannot value a species because it makes beautiful music. They cannot see beyond quantifiable metrics to the immeasurable worth of life itself. She looked around at the empty landscape. This is the result. We stayed on Novanix 7 for several hours, walking the empty surface in a kind of pilgrimage. Galaxia pointed out where landmarks had been, reciting from memory the demographic data and cultural highlights of the colony. It was her way, I realized, of honoring those who had been erased, by remembering that they had existed, that they had mattered. Before we left, she produced a small device from her suit's pocket and placed it on the ground where the colony center had been. It activated with a soft hum, projecting a simple holographic marker into the air, a sphere of light containing the names of all known residents of Novanix 7 at the time of its destruction. "The official memorial is on Lumina Prime," she explained. "But I wanted something here, where they lived. Something that would remain even when no one is present to see it." As we returned to our ship, I felt the weight of what I had witnessed settling into my bones. This wasn't just a tragic historical event. It was a warning, a glimpse of what could happen again if peace failed. The responsibility of my new role felt suddenly heavier, more real. "What now?" I asked, as our ship lifted off, leaving the barren world and its solitary memorial behind. "Now we return to the work of governance," Galaxia replied. "With, I hope, a renewed understanding of what's at stake." I nodded, looking back at the viewing screen showing the diminishing planetoid. "I've made my decision," I said finally. "I'm staying, not just because of the prophecy or the peace it secures, but because this," I gestured toward Novanix 7, "can never happen again. And if my perspective helps prevent even one decision that might lead to something like this, then it's worth any sacrifice of personal freedom." Galaxia's expression softened. "Thank you, Raiden. The Seven Systems needs your voice, perhaps more than either of us initially realized." As we accelerated away from the graveyard world, I found myself wondering about the path ahead. I had started this journey seeking only a hot dog, and now I was bound to the governance of 7 star systems, advisor to an Empress, and voice of conscience in decisions affecting billions of lives. It wasn't the life I had expected, but looking at Galaxia, seeing both the ruler responsible for difficult decisions and the person who carried the weight of their consequences, I knew it was where I needed to be. The following months were a whirlwind of activity as I settled into my role as Ambassador of Conscience. The position evolved naturally into something neither Galaxia nor I had fully anticipated: part diplomat, part ethical advisor, part cultural interpreter between different species and systems. I traveled extensively throughout the 7 systems, visiting worlds that had never seen a human before, listening to disputes and concerns that might never have reached the Imperial Court. I developed a reputation for unorthodox solutions that prioritized individual well-being over systemic efficiency, much to the consternation of traditionalists on the Council. But results were difficult to argue with. Conflict zones that had festered for generations found new paths to resolution. Species that had been marginalized gained voices in governance. And slowly, the rigid ethical algorithms that had governed the 7 systems began to incorporate concepts like moral improvisation and contextual judgment. Throughout it all, Galaxia remained my strongest ally. We developed a working relationship that surprised both of us with its effectiveness. Her deep knowledge of systems and traditions complemented my instinct for innovative solutions. We made a good team, though neither of us said so explicitly. Our personal relationship evolved as well, though in ways neither of us acknowledged directly. Our meetings, once formal and confined to official settings, gradually shifted to informal conversations in her private study or over meals that increasingly featured Earth cuisine I had taught her to prepare. We developed in-jokes and shared references that confused the council members. We became, against all probability, friends. And then came the Outer Rim crisis, the coalition, despite accepting the prophecy's fulfillment and maintaining the peace, had been developing new technologies that alarmed Seven Systems' intelligence. Reports suggested they were testing improved versions of the weapon that had destroyed Novenix 7, this time with precise control over the molecular destabilization effect. The Council was divided on how to respond. Some advocated preemptive military action. Others favored diplomatic protests backed by economic sanctions. Galaxia, uncharacteristically, had not yet stated her position when she summoned me to an emergency private meeting. I found her in her study, but not at her usual place behind the desk. She was standing at the window, watching the hyperspace streaks as the celestial harmony traveled between systems. She had dismissed her attendance, and we were truly alone. A rare occurrence given her status. "You've heard about the Coalition's weapons development," she said without turning. "Yes, the Council seems to be leaning toward a show of military strength. They are afraid. Fear makes beings of all species revert to aggression." She finally turned to face me. "What does the Ambassador of Conscience advise?" I considered carefully. This wasn't a theoretical exercise or a diplomatic puzzle. It was potentially the first step toward another devastating war. "Not what the Council wants to hear," I admitted. "They want permission to flex military muscle, to remind the Coalition that the Seven Systems remains powerful. But threats will only accelerate their weapons development. If they feel threatened, they'll prioritize defensive and offensive capabilities. We need to address the underlying issue, which is fear, on both sides." I moved to stand beside her at the window. "The Coalition developed the original weapon because they feared our military superiority. They're improving it because they fear we might resume hostilities despite the peace accords. We're considering military action because we fear they'll use these weapons against us. It's a cycle of escalation driven by mutual fear." She nodded slowly. "A logical analysis. What do you propose instead?" "Something radical. Something no one would expect." I took a deep breath. "Invite them to Novenix 7. Her star-filled eyes widened. "What? Invite the Coalition leadership to visit Novenix 7. Show them what their weapon actually did, not in reports or data, but in person. Let them stand on that empty ground and feel what we felt. Then, offer them partnership in developing defensive technology that would prevent such weapons from ever being effective again. You want us to share defensive capabilities with a potential enemy. I want us to transform a potential enemy into a partner." I met her gaze steadily. "The crystals on Araxis Minor sing when they resonate with each other. Maybe our civilizations can do the same if we find the right frequency to connect them." Galaxia was silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. Not the restrained, almost smile I had become accustomed to, but something fuller, more genuine. "This is why the prophecy brought you to us, Raiden Quill. This kind of thinking simply doesn't exist within our traditional frameworks." "Is that a yes?" "It is a qualified yes. The Council will resist strenuously. The military leadership will be apoplectic. There are significant security concerns to address." She tilted her head thoughtfully. "But the fundamental concept is sound. Fear cannot be conquered by greater fear, only by understanding and common purpose." She moved to her communication console. "I will need you to help me craft this proposal carefully. We must present it, not as capitulation, but as strategic wisdom." As we worked through the night, developing the diplomatic framework for this unprecedented initiative, I found myself watching Galaxia with new appreciation. She was taking an enormous political risk based on my recommendation, placing her authority and possibly the security of her systems on the line because she believed in the approach I had suggested. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she asked, catching me watching her. "I'm just thinking about how far we've come from a stolen hot dog and a forced marriage." She laughed, a sound I had heard more frequently in recent months, but that still delighted me with its rarity. Indeed, though I maintain it was a ceremonial offering, not a hot dog. We'll have to agree to disagree on that one. Her expression softened. Raiden, regardless of how the council responds to this proposal, I want you to know that your presence these past months has been valuable to me. Not just to the seven systems, but to me personally. The admission caught me off guard. Even though I constantly challenge traditional protocols and make your counselors uncomfortable. Especially because of that, she held my gaze. Before you arrived, I was surrounded by people who either feared me or wanted something from me. You were the first person in a very long time who simply spoke truth as you saw it, without calculation or agenda. Well, I did have an agenda at first, I reminded her. Avoiding execution and unwanted marriage. True. But since then, you have served not out of obligation but choice. She hesitated, then added quietly. And I have come to value that choice greatly. There was something in her voice, something beyond imperial appreciation or even friendship. That made my heart beat faster. But before I could respond, her communication device chimed, breaking the moment. The council has convened, she said, after checking the message. They await our proposal. The tension of the moment passed, replaced by the immediate demands of governance and diplomacy. But as we walked together toward the council chamber, I felt a shift in our relationship. Something unspoken but real. A connection that went beyond our official roles. Whatever happened with the coalition and the weapons crisis, I knew that Galaxia and I had formed a bond that neither of us had anticipated, but that both of us now treasured. It was, perhaps, the most unexpected outcome of my impulsive reach for a hot dog with grilled onions in a distant market. The coalition leadership's visit to Novanix 7 was a diplomatic breakthrough, unlike anything the Seven Systems had seen in generations. The images, broadcast throughout both territories, of coalition representatives standing alongside Galaxia on the barren surface were powerful beyond words. Their formal apology for the unintended genocide and commitment to weapons limitations sent shockwaves through interstellar politics. But the true transformation came in the months that followed, as joint research facilities were established to develop protective technologies against molecular destabilization weapons. Former enemies worked side by side, sharing knowledge that had previously been closely guarded military secrets. The initiative expanded to include other defensive technologies, then to non-military research, and finally to cultural exchange programs that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. Through it all, I continued my work as ambassador of conscience, traveling between worlds, mediating disputes, and always asking the question, how does this decision affect the actual people involved? It wasn't perfect. There were setbacks, resistance from traditionalists on both sides, and moments when the fragile peace seemed in danger of collapse. But each crisis was met with renewed commitment to finding solutions that preserved both security and humanity. And then, exactly one standard year after my fateful attempt to steal a hot dog, Galaxia summoned me to her private quarters, not her official study, but her personal living space, a sanctuary few were ever invited to enter. The room was surprisingly simple for an Empress, comfortable but not ostentatious, with touches that reflected her individual taste rather than imperial grandeur. Art from various worlds adorned the walls, and a large viewport showed the real space view of Lumina Prime, the throne world we were currently orbiting. Galaxia was not dressed in her imperial regalia, but in a simple outfit that reminded me somewhat of Earth casual wear, perhaps deliberately. She greeted me with a warmth that had become familiar, but still made my heart skip. Raiden, thank you for coming. When the Empress calls, who am I to refuse? I joked, though we both knew I had long since earned the right to decline imperial summons if I chose. I've called you here not as Empress, but as Galaxia. She gestured to a comfortable seating area. Please, sit. There is something important I wish to discuss. I sat, noting the unusual tension in her manner. Is everything all right? Has something happened with the coalition? No, nothing like that. Our diplomatic initiatives continue to progress well. She took a seat across from me, then surprised me by reaching out to take my hands in hers. This is more personal. Her touch sent an unexpected warmth through me. In all our months of working together, physical contact had been minimal and always formal. The occasional brush of hands when passing documents. The ritualized touches required by certain ceremonies. This deliberate connection was new and significant. I've been reflecting on the anniversary of your arrival, she continued. 1 year since a hungry human changed the course of 7 star systems by trying to steal a ceremonial offering. A hot dog, I corrected automatically, making her smile. As you wish. Her star-filled eyes held mine. In that year, you have transformed not just interstellar politics, but my understanding of governance, of connection, of many things. I swallowed, suddenly nervous without knowing exactly why. You've changed me too, you know. When I arrived, I was just a drifter with a conscience. You gave me a purpose, a way to make that conscience matter on a scale I never imagined. We have changed each other, she agreed softly. And that is why I've asked you here today. Because I believe we stand at another crossroads. Another moment of choice that could change everything. What choice is that? She took a deep breath. The prophecy spoke of binding and joining. We interpreted those words to mean your role as ambassador, your connection to the governance of the 7 systems. And that interpretation has served us well, brought peace and progress beyond expectations. She paused, her grip on my hands tightening slightly. But I have come to wonder if there might be another layer of meaning. Another interpretation that we have not yet explored. My heart was definitely beating faster now. And what interpretation is that? A personal one. Her voice was soft but steady. Raiden Quill, I have developed feelings for you that go beyond imperial appreciation or political alliance. Feelings that I did not expect and, for some time, did not recognize, having never experienced them before. I stared at her, momentarily speechless. The Empress of the 7 systems was telling me, a former pilot who had stumbled into her life by accident, that she had feelings for me. Say something, she prompted, when my silence stretched too long. I'm processing, I managed. This is not how I expected this conversation to go. If you do not share these feelings, I understand completely. Our working relationship need not change. No, I interrupted, squeezing her hands. That's not it at all. I never thought you would see me that way. You're an Empress, the ruler of 7 star systems. You are not just anything, she said firmly. You are Raiden Quill, the man who saved the jellyfish violins because they made beautiful music. The man who heard songs in crystals that others saw only as resources. The man who showed an Empress how to grill onions without crying. Her lips curved in a smile. The man who has, against all probability, become essential to my happiness. The simple honesty of her words broke through my surprise. I've been falling in love with you for months, I admitted. I just never thought it was possible, given who we are, what we represent. And who are we, really? She asked. Beyond our titles and roles? 2 people who found each other in the strangest of circumstances, who complement each other's strengths and balance each other's weaknesses, who work well together and laugh at the same absurdities. I smiled. Who still argue about whether it was a hot dog or a ceremonial offering. Perhaps it was both, she suggested, leaning closer. Perhaps many things can be true at once. When we kissed, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, and the most extraordinary, a connection that had been building since that first confrontation in my holding cell, finally acknowledged and embraced. When we finally parted, Galaxia's star-filled eyes were shining with an emotion I now recognized as joy. "So," she said, "are you prepared to revise our interpretation of the prophecy once again, Ambassador Quill?" "I think," I replied, pulling her close for another kiss, "that some prophecies are best fulfilled by following your heart rather than tradition, and my heart is definitely with you." 3 years later, Galaxia and I stood together on a newly terraformed world at the border between 7 systems and Coalition space. What had once been a contested military zone was now home to the Interstellar Harmony Institute, a joint research and diplomatic facility dedicated to fostering collaboration between formerly hostile powers. But we weren't there in our official capacities. We had come to inaugurate a small establishment at the edge of the Institute's grounds, a simple restaurant with a sign that read, "Snack of Destiny." "Are you certain about this?" Galaxia asked, as we stood before the entrance. "You could have any role you wished in the new joint governance structure. Director of Intercultural Relations, Chief Diplomatic Advisor, anything." I smiled, taking her hand, a gesture that still drew looks from traditionalists, but had become accepted as part of the human influence on imperial protocol. "I've spent 3 years helping reshape interstellar politics. I think I've earned the right to grill some onions," she laughed, the sound no longer rare but still precious to me. "The ambassador of conscience retires to become a chef. The council will be scandalized. Let them be scandalized. Besides, I'm not retiring completely. I'll still consult on ethical matters when needed. I'll just do it over hot dogs instead of in formal chambers." We entered the small restaurant, our restaurant, and I breathed in the familiar sense of cooking that had become a constant in our relationship. What had begun as a cultural exchange lesson had evolved into a shared passion, with Galaxia proving to be a surprisingly adept student of Earth cuisine. The interior was simple, but welcoming, with tables made from reclaimed materials and artwork from dozens of worlds adorning the walls. At the back, a small plaque listed the names of the Novanic's 7 victims, a reminder of why this place existed, of the cost of failing to find common ground. "Do you think they'll come?" Galaxia asked, looking around at the empty tables. "Will people from both territories actually eat together?" "They will," I said confidently. "Food brings people together across all boundaries. It's universal. Everyone gets hungry." As if on cue, the door opened, admitting our first customers, a mixed group of 7 systems researchers and coalition engineers from the Institute. They paused upon recognizing us, clearly uncertain about the protocol for encountering the Empress in a restaurant setting. "Welcome to Snack of Destiny," I called, gesturing to the tables. "Today's special is hot dogs with grilled onions, a ceremonial Earth offering that accidentally changed the course of galactic history." Galaxia squeezed my hand, her star-filled eyes dancing with amusement and affection. "And the best part," she added, addressing our stunned customers, "is that here. You don't need to worry about accidentally marrying anyone if you eat one." As laughter broke the tension and our guests moved to take seats, Galaxia leaned close to whisper in my ear, "Although, in your case, I'm rather glad you did." I smiled, remembering the strange journey that had brought us here, from a stolen hot dog to a diplomatic revolution, to a love that crossed species and systems. "Me too," I replied, kissing her lightly. Best mistake I ever made. And as we moved to greet our guests properly, I couldn't help thinking that sometimes the universe knows exactly what it's doing, even when it disguises destiny as a simple hot dog with grilled onions. End.